They said she couldn't handle training. She flattened 5 Marines instead. Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall or watching movies, she was in the garage with her father, learning how to fix cars and change tires. Her hands were always dirty, her knuckles scraped from working on engines, and her arms strong from lifting heavy parts. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah learned early that life wasn't going to be easy. Her father worked double shifts at the local factory, and her mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. Money was always tight, but her parents taught her something more valuable than wealth: the power of determination and hard work. When Sarah turned 18, she made a decision that shocked everyone in her small community. She walked into the Marine Corps recruiting office and signed her name on the dotted line. The recruiter, Sergeant Williams, looked at her with raised eyebrows. She was barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed only 130 pounds. Her long brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a faded t-shirt. "Are you sure about this, miss?" Sergeant Williams asked, tapping his pen on the desk. "Marine training is the toughest military training in the world. It breaks grown men who've been preparing for years." Sarah looked him straight in the eye and nodded. "I'm sure, Sergeant. I want to serve my country and I want to be a Marine." The news spread through her hometown like wildfire. At the local diner, people whispered over their coffee and pie. "That Martinez girl thinks she can be a Marine," they said, shaking their heads. "She'll be back home crying in 2 weeks." Even her own family had doubts. Her mother worried constantly, calling her friends and asking if they thought Sarah was making a mistake. Her father supported her decision but privately wondered if his daughter truly understood what she was getting into. Sarah's high school friends were the harshest critics. "You're crazy," her former cheerleader friend Jessica told her at a going-away party. "Marines are big, tough guys who can run for miles and do hundreds of push-ups. What makes you think you can keep up with them?" But Sarah had a secret that none of them knew about. Since she was 12 years old, she had been secretly training in mixed martial arts at a small gym on the other side of town. Her instructor, Carlos, was a former Army Ranger who saw potential in the young girl. He taught her not just how to fight, but how to think strategically, how to use her opponent's size against them, and most importantly, how to never give up. 3 nights a week, Sarah would tell her parents she was studying at the library. Instead, she was in the gym, learning Brazilian jiu-jitsu, boxing, and tactical combat. Carlos pushed her harder than he pushed his other students because he could see the fire in her eyes. She wasn't just learning to fight. She was preparing for something bigger. "Size doesn't matter in real combat," Carlos told her during one particularly intense training session. "What matters is technique, speed, and mental toughness. You have all 3, Sarah. Don't let anyone tell you different." As her departure date approached, the doubts from others grew louder. At her part-time job at the local grocery store, customers would make comments. "I heard you're going to be a Marine," an elderly man said while she bagged his groceries. "My grandson tried that. He lasted 3 days before they sent him home. You seem like a nice girl, but maybe you should consider something more suitable." Sarah smiled politely, but inside, her determination grew stronger with every doubt expressed. She had spent 6 years preparing for this moment, even if nobody knew it. While other teenagers were at parties, she was perfecting her technique. While they were sleeping in, she was running 5 miles before dawn. The night before she left for Paris Island, South Carolina, where Marine boot camp would begin, Sarah sat in her childhood bedroom looking at the pictures on her wall. There were photos of her family, her friends, and her high school graduation. But tucked away in her desk drawer was something else: certificates from martial arts tournaments she had won, photos from her secret training sessions, and a letter from Carlos. "Sarah," the letter read, "you are one of the strongest people I have ever trained, not just physically, but mentally. The Marines don't know what's coming their way. Remember everything I taught you. Trust your instincts and show them what a real warrior looks like. I'm proud of you." Her parents drove her to the bus station the next morning. Her mother cried and her father hugged her tightly. "We believe in you, mija," he whispered in her ear. "Show them what we taught you about never giving up." As the bus pulled away from the station, Sarah looked out the window at her small town getting smaller in the distance. She thought about all the people who said she couldn't do it, all the doubts and whispers and headshakes. A small smile crossed her face. They had no idea what they were talking about. The bus ride to South Carolina took 2 days. Sarah sat quietly, reading and preparing mentally for what was ahead. Other recruits on the bus were nervous, talking loudly about their fears and expectations. Some were big, muscular young men who bragged about their high school football achievements. Others were quiet and serious, lost in their own thoughts. Nobody paid much attention to the small girl in the back of the bus with the ponytail and the calm expression. That was exactly how Sarah wanted it. When the bus finally pulled up to the gates of Paris Island, Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, but it wasn't fear. It was excitement. After 6 years of secret preparation, after a lifetime of being underestimated, she was finally going to have the chance to prove what she was really made of. As they filed off the bus, she could hear the drill instructors yelling in the distance. The sound that terrified most of the other recruits only made Sarah more focused. She had been preparing for this moment longer than any of them knew. The real test was about to begin. The yellow footprints painted on the concrete were famous among Marines. Every recruit who had ever made it through Paris Island had stood on those footprints on their first day. Sarah placed her feet carefully on the painted marks, her back straight and her eyes forward, as the drill instructors circled around the new recruits like sharks. Drill instructor Staff Sergeant Morrison was a mountain of a man, standing 6 feet 5 inches tall with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could shatter glass. His campaign cover was pulled down low over his eyes, and his uniform was pressed to perfection. When he spoke, even the birds seemed to stop singing. "Listen up, maggots," he roared. "For the next 13 weeks I own you. Your mommy isn't here to hold your hand. Your daddy isn't here to tell you how special you are. You belong to me now, and I'm going to turn you into Marines or break you trying." His eyes scanned the group of new recruits, stopping briefly on each face. When his gaze reached Sarah, she saw something flicker across his expression. It might have been surprise or maybe disappointment. He moved closer to her, his boots clicking on the concrete. "What do we have here?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Did someone's little sister get lost on the way to cheerleading practice? The other recruits tried not to smile, but Sarah could see some of them fighting back grins. She kept her eyes straight ahead and her mouth shut, just as she had been taught to do. "I asked you a question, recruit," Morrison shouted, his face inches from hers. "What are you doing in my Marine Corps?" "Sir, this recruit came here to become a Marine, sir," Sarah responded in a clear, strong voice. Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A Marine, you? I've seen more muscle on a chicken wing. You'll be crying for your mommy before the sun sets today." Over the next few hours, the recruits were processed through the system. They received their uniforms, their gear, and their assignments to platoons. Sarah was assigned to Platoon 3086, along with 59 other recruits. As she looked around at her new platoon mates, she realized she was not just the only woman, but also the smallest person in the group. The other recruits came from all over the country. There was Jake Thompson from Ohio, a former high school wrestling champion who looked like he could bench press a car. Marcus Rodriguez from California had been a college football player before joining the Marines. Tommy Chen from New York was quiet but built like a brick wall. During their first meal in the chow hall, Sarah sat at a table with several of her platoon mates. The conversation quickly turned to their backgrounds and why they had joined the Marines. "I'm here because I want to be the best," Jake said, flexing his biceps. "I want to prove I can handle anything they throw at me." "My whole family has been in the military," Marcus added. "My grandfather was a Marine in Vietnam. My father was Army in Desert Storm. It's in my blood." When they turned to Sarah, she simply said, "I'm here to serve my country and become a Marine." Jake laughed and shook his head. "No offense, but you look like you should be serving coffee, not serving your country. This isn't a game. People are going to depend on you in combat. How are you supposed to have my back if you can't even reach my shoulders?" The comment stung, but Sarah had heard worse. She finished her meal in silence while the others continued to joke about her chances of making it through training. That first night in the barracks, as the recruits tried to sleep on their hard racks, whispers filled the darkness. "She'll be gone by the end of the week," someone said quietly. "I give her 3 days. Max," another voice replied. "Poor girl has no idea what she's gotten herself into." Sarah lay in her rack, staring at the ceiling, listening to every word, but instead of feeling discouraged, she felt something else entirely. Motivation. Each doubt, each whispered criticism, Each shake of the head only made her more determined to prove them wrong. The next morning came early, as mornings always do in Marine boot camp. The lights came on at 4:30 a.m. and the drill instructors immediately began screaming orders. The recruits had exactly 60 seconds to get out of their racks, get dressed, and be standing at attention. Sarah was one of the first recruits ready. While others fumbled with their uniforms or struggled to tie their boots quickly enough, she stood perfectly still, her uniform squared away and her bearing military sharp. Drill instructor Morrison noticed and walked over to her. "Well, well," he said. "Looks like someone has been practicing. Too bad it won't matter when the real training starts." The first week of boot camp was designed to break down civilian habits and begin building Marines. The recruits learned how to march, how to stand at attention, how to make their racks to military standards, and how to follow orders without question. Sarah excelled at everything. Her rack was always perfect, her uniform was always squared away, and she never made the same mistake twice. But the physical challenges hadn't really begun yet, and everyone knew that's where she would struggle. During their first real physical training session, the recruits were taken to a large field where they would begin learning Marine Corps martial arts and basic fitness requirements. Drill instructor Morrison stood in front of the group with his arms crossed. "Today we find out who has what it takes," he announced. "We're going to start with some basic combat training. I need 5 volunteers to demonstrate what they think they know about fighting." Hands shot up around the group. Jake Thompson volunteered immediately, as did Marcus Rodriguez and 3 other large, athletic-looking recruits. They stepped forward with confidence, ready to show off their strength and skills. "Outstanding," Morrison said. "Now I need someone to be your opponent for these demonstrations." The 5 volunteers looked around at each other, expecting Morrison to pick one of them or maybe call in another drill instructor. Instead, he pointed directly at Sarah. "You," he said with a grin that looked more like a grimace. "Front and center, recruit. Time to see what you're really made of." Sarah stepped forward without hesitation, even as gasps and murmurs rippled through the platoon. She was about to face 5 of the biggest, strongest recruits in her platoon, and everyone expected it to be a disaster. What they didn't expect was what happened next. As Sarah took her position in the center of the training area, something changed in her demeanor. The quiet small girl from Texas was gone, replaced by someone entirely different. Her stance shifted, her breathing became controlled, and her eyes took on a focus that none of them had seen before. Carlos had taught her well. 6 years of secret training were about to pay off in a way that no one, not even Sarah herself, could have fully anticipated. The training area fell silent as Sarah faced her first opponent, Jake Thompson. At 6 feet 2 inches and 220 pounds of solid muscle, he looked like a giant compared to her. Jake cracked his knuckles and smiled confidently at his platoon mates. "I'll try to go easy on her," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't want to hurt the little lady on her first day?" Drill instructor Morrison stepped between them, his eyes gleaming with what looked like cruel anticipation. "This is hand-to-hand combat training," he announced to the gathered platoon. "The object is simple. Take down your opponent using whatever techniques you know. No weapons, no cheap shots, just skill against skill." Sarah said nothing. She simply took her stance, her feet positioned perfectly, her weight balanced, her hands up in a defensive position that looked surprisingly professional. Some of the recruits noticed the change in her posture, but most were too busy feeling sorry for what they thought was about to happen to her. "Begin," Morrison shouted. Jake rushed forward immediately, using his size and weight advantage to try to overwhelm Sarah with a simple tackle. It was exactly what she had expected. In the split second before impact, Sarah shifted her weight, stepped to the side, and used Jake's own momentum against him. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but it seemed to unfold in slow motion for everyone watching. As Jake lunged past her, Sarah grabbed his extended arm, planted her foot, and executed a perfect hip throw that sent all 220 pounds of him flying through the air. He hit the ground hard, flat on his back, with Sarah controlling his arm in a submission hold that could have broken his elbow if she had applied more pressure. The entire platoon stood in stunned silence. Jake looked up at the sky, confused and winded, trying to figure out how he had gone from charging forward to lying on his back in the span of a heartbeat. "Time," Morrison called, though his voice sounded different now. The mocking tone was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect. Sarah immediately released Jake's arm and helped him to his feet. Good effort, she said quietly, showing no sign of arrogance or celebration. Jake shook his head, still trying to process what had happened. Where did you learn to do that? Before Sarah could answer, Morrison called for the next opponent. Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward, his confidence shaken by what he had just witnessed but his pride still intact. That was just luck, Marcus said, more to convince himself than anyone else. There's no way she can do that again. Marcus was smarter than Jake. Instead of rushing in, he circled Sarah carefully, looking for an opening. He had been a football player and understood the importance of patience and timing. Sarah waited calmly in the center of the circle, turning slowly to keep him in sight. When Marcus finally made his move, it was fast and calculated. He shot low, going for her legs in a double-leg takedown that had worked countless times on the football field. But Sarah saw it coming. She sprawled backward, avoided his grasp, and caught him in a front-face lock as he passed underneath her. Using a technique Carlos had made her practice thousands of times, Sarah pivoted and drove Marcus face-first into the ground, while maintaining control of his head and neck. He found himself pinned with Sarah's knee in his back and her hands controlling his movement completely. Time, Morrison called again. The platoon was no longer silent. Whispers and exclamations filled the air as Sarah helped Marcus to his feet. 2 down, 3 to go. Tommy Chen was the third volunteer, and he was the smartest of the group. He had watched both previous matches carefully and realized that Sarah was not the helpless girl they had all assumed her to be. When he stepped forward, his approach was entirely different. I can see you know what you're doing, he said respectfully. Let's see what you've got. Tommy was a wrestler and understood grappling. He moved carefully, looking for opportunities to use his size and strength advantage while respecting Sarah's obvious skill. The match lasted longer than the first 2, with both fighters testing each other's abilities. But experience and technique eventually won out. Sarah caught Tommy in a leg sweep that sent him tumbling, and before he could recover, she had secured a rear naked choke that forced him to tap out or risk unconsciousness. Time. Morrison called for the 3rd time, and now his voice carried genuine surprise. The 4th and 5th opponents came forward together, having decided that their only chance was to work as a team. Morrison allowed it, curious to see how Sarah would handle multiple attackers. David Walsh and Chris Porter were both big men, former high school athletes who had joined the Marines to prove their toughness. Facing them simultaneously would be Sarah's biggest challenge yet. The 2 men spread out, trying to attack from different angles. Sarah positioned herself so that she could see both of them, her breathing calm and controlled despite facing 2 opponents who together outweighed her by nearly 300 pounds. David came in first, trying to grab her from behind while Chris attacked from the front. Sarah ducked under David's arms, causing him to collide with Chris. As they untangled themselves, Sarah struck with lightning speed. She caught David's arm as he tried to recover his balance and used his own weight to flip him over her hip in another perfect throw. Before Chris could react, Sarah had pivoted and caught him with a foot sweep that sent him crashing into David, just as he was trying to get up. Both men ended up in a heap on the ground with Sarah standing over them, completely in control and barely breathing hard. The entire platoon erupted in cheers and amazement. Even drill instructor Morrison was clapping slowly, his expression showing genuine admiration for what he had just witnessed. Outstanding, Morrison said, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there before. Absolutely outstanding. As the 5 defeated recruits got to their feet, brushing dirt off their uniforms and nursing their bruised egos along with their bruised bodies, they looked at Sarah with entirely different eyes. The small girl from Texas had just demonstrated skills that none of them possessed. Jake Thompson was the first to speak. Where the hell did you learn to fight like that? Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving at Paris Island. I had a good teacher, she said simply. Word of what had happened spread through the entire company within hours. By evening chow, recruits from other platoons were coming up to Sarah to ask if the stories they had heard were true. The drill instructors from other platoons were asking Morrison about his secret weapon. That night in the barracks, the whispers were very different from the night before. Did you see what she did to Thompson? He flew through the air like a rag doll. Rodriguez is twice her size and she pinned him like he was a child. Taking on 2 guys at once and winning? That's not normal. Sarah lay in her rack listening to the new tone in their voices. Respect had replaced mockery. Admiration had replaced doubt. But she knew this was just the beginning. The real challenges of Marine boot camp were still ahead, and she would have to prove herself again and again. But for now, for this one moment, she allowed herself to feel proud. 6 years of secret training, 6 years of preparation, 6 years of dedication had led to this day. She had proven that size and strength weren't everything. That technique and determination could overcome any advantage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, Sarah Martinez slept peacefully, knowing that she belonged exactly where she was. News of Sarah's combat demonstration spread beyond her platoon like wildfire through dry grass. By the next morning, she had become something of a legend among the recruits at Parris Island. But with fame came a new kind of challenge that she hadn't expected. During morning chow, recruits from other companies approached her table with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. A tall recruit named Vincent Murphy from Company B sat down across from her without invitation. "So you're the girl who supposedly took down 5 guys yesterday," he said, his voice carrying doubt. "A lot of people are saying it was just beginner's luck that those guys went easy on you because you're a woman." Sarah looked up from her scrambled eggs and toast. "I suppose there's only one way to find out if that's true," she replied calmly. Word spread quickly that there might be another challenge, and by afternoon physical training, a crowd had gathered. Even some of the drill instructors from other platoons had come to watch. The pressure was building, and everyone knew that Sarah's reputation was about to be tested again. Drill instructor Morrison addressed the gathered crowd. "It seems we have some doubters in our midst," he announced. "Some people think yesterday's demonstration was a fluke. Anyone who wants to test that theory is welcome to step forward." 3 recruits immediately volunteered. Vincent Murphy, who had started the challenge at breakfast, along with 2 of his friends from Company B. They were all bigger than the guys Sarah had faced the day before, and they had the advantage of having watched her previous fights. "This time, we do it elimination style," Morrison declared. "1 opponent at a time, no rest between matches. Last person standing wins." Sarah nodded her acceptance, though inside she felt a flutter of nervousness. Fighting 5 fresh opponents in a row would push her skills to the limit, especially now that they knew what to expect from her. Vincent Murphy stepped up first. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall and built like a linebacker, with thick arms and a chest that strained against his utility shirt. Unlike Jake Thompson's reckless charge the day before, Vincent approached the match with careful calculation. "I've been wrestling since I was 8 years old," he told Sarah as they took their positions. "I've studied your moves from yesterday. This won't be as easy as you think." When the match began, Vincent proved he was right. He kept his distance, circling Sarah carefully, looking for openings while avoiding the traps that had caught the previous day's opponents. When he finally engaged, it was with proper technique and smart positioning. The 2 fighters grappled for nearly 5 minutes, each gaining and losing advantages in a display of skill that impressed even the drill instructors. Vincent's size and strength were formidable, but Sarah's technique and conditioning began to show their value as the match wore on. Finally, Sarah managed to catch Vincent in a triangle choke, using her legs to cut off the blood flow to his brain. He fought the submission for 30 seconds before tapping out, acknowledging defeat with grudging respect. "That was no fluke," he gasped as Sarah helped him to his feet. "You earned that win." The second opponent, Derek Sullivan from New York, was smarter still. He had watched Vincent's match carefully and adjusted his strategy accordingly. Derek was a former Golden Gloves boxer who understood distance and timing. Instead of engaging in grappling, where Sarah's ground fighting skills gave her an advantage, Derek tried to keep the fight standing and use his boxing experience. For the first time since arriving at Parris Island, Sarah found herself facing someone whose striking skills matched her own. Derek's jabs were sharp and accurate, and his footwork was excellent. Sarah had to use everything Carlos had taught her about boxing and kickboxing to stay competitive. The match became a chess game of strikes and counters, with both fighters showing impressive skill. The turning point came when Derek overextended on a right cross, leaving himself slightly off balance. Sarah caught his arm, used his forward momentum to pull him into a knee strike, and then transitioned into a hip throw that sent him to the ground. Before he could recover, she had secured a submission hold that ended the match. Derek sat up, shaking his head in amazement. "I've never seen anyone combine striking and grappling like that," he admitted. "Where did you train?" The third opponent was the biggest challenge yet. Rodriguez Gutierrez was a former Marine recruit who had washed out of training 6 months earlier. and was getting a second chance. He knew the system, understood the techniques being taught, and had the additional motivation of not wanting to lose to someone he saw as having advantages he didn't have. "This is about more than just fighting," Rodriguez told the crowd before the match began. "This is about proving that the Marine Corps standards are the same for everyone, regardless of gender." His words added pressure that Sarah felt in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman who might follow in her footsteps. Rodriguez was technically sound and physically imposing. At 230 pounds, he was the biggest opponent Sarah had faced, and his previous Marine training showed in his movement and tactics. The match was intense and physical, with both fighters pushing their limits. Sarah's smaller size actually became an advantage as the fight progressed. Her superior conditioning meant she could maintain her technique longer, while Rodriguez began to slow down as the match extended. When he made a crucial mistake in positioning, Sarah was quick to capitalize, securing a rear naked choke that ended the fight. As she helped Rodriguez to his feet, he looked at her with genuine respect. "You've got what it takes," he said simply. "Don't let anyone tell you different." By this point, word had reached the company commanders and even some of the base leadership. Senior drill instructor Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Hayes, a 20-year Marine veteran and one of the few female drill instructors on Parris Island, had come to watch the spectacle. After Sarah's third consecutive victory, Gunnery Sergeant Hayes stepped forward. "That's enough," she announced to the crowd. "This recruit has proven her point. Everyone back to training." As the crowd dispersed, Hayes approached Sarah privately. "Walk with me, recruit," she said. They walked toward the barracks in silence for several minutes before Hayes spoke again. "I've been a drill instructor for 8 years, she said. "I've seen thousands of recruits come through these gates. What you did out there was impressive, but it's also dangerous." Sarah looked confused. "Dangerous, Gunnery Sergeant?" "You've made yourself a target," Hayes explained. "There are people here who will see your success as a threat to their idea of what a Marine should be. Some will try to tear you down not because you're weak, but because you're strong." They stopped walking, and Hayes turned to face Sarah directly. "From now on, you're going to be held to a higher standard than everyone else. Your every move will be scrutinized. Your every mistake will be magnified. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah thought about her father working double shifts, her mother cleaning houses, and Carlos pushing her to be better than she thought possible. "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. I'm prepared." Hayes smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. "Good, because the real test isn't proving you can fight. The real test is proving you can lead, follow, and be part of a team even when some people don't want you there." That evening, as Sarah lay in her rack reflecting on the day's events, she realized that Gunnery Sergeant Hayes was right. The physical challenges would continue, but the mental and emotional challenges were just beginning. She had proven she could fight, but now she had to prove she could be a Marine in every sense of the word. The yellow footprints had been just the beginning of a journey that would test everything she had learned about herself and everything she believed about what she could become. Outside the barracks, she could hear the sound of drill instructors preparing for the next day's training. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to prove that she belonged exactly where she was. The weeks following Sarah's demonstrations brought a complex mix of respect and resentment from her fellow recruits. While many admired her skills and determination, others felt that she was receiving special attention that somehow diminished their own achievements. The tension came to a head during the 6th week of training, during what Marines call the Crucible. The Crucible is the final test of Marine boot camp, a 54-hour challenge that pushes recruits to their physical, mental, and emotional limits. It involves long marches, obstacle courses, combat simulations, and team challenges, all while operating on minimal food and sleep. It's designed to forge individuals into a unified team that thinks and acts like Marines. Sarah's platoon, 3086, had performed well throughout their training. Despite the initial doubts and conflicts, they had learned to work together and respect each other's strengths. But the Crucible would test not just their individual abilities, but their capacity to function as a single unit when everything was on the line. The challenge began at 300 hours on a cold Thursday morning in November. The recruits were roused from their racks after only 3 hours of sleep and immediately thrown into their first event. A 12-mile march with full combat gear in complete darkness. Sarah had always excelled at endurance events. Her small frame meant she carried less weight relative to her strength, and years of training with Carlos had built her cardiovascular system to handle extended physical stress. As the platoon moved through the darkness, she found herself naturally taking a position near the front of the formation. But around mile 8, problems began to emerge. Several of the larger recruits who had dominated earlier physical events were struggling with the sustained pace and heavy loads. Tommy Chen, who had been one of her early opponents in combat training, was falling behind despite his obvious strength. "Keep up, Chen." Drill instructor Morrison barked from his position alongside the column. "Marines don't leave Marines behind." Sarah could see that Tommy was struggling not just with physical exhaustion, but with the mental pressure of holding back the entire platoon. She made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself, without saying a word. She dropped back in the formation until she was alongside Tommy. Then she reached out and took part of his equipment, redistributing the weight so that he could maintain the pace. "What are you doing?" Tommy gasped, surprised by her action. "We're a team," Sarah replied simply. "We all make it, or none of us make it." Marcus Rodriguez, who was marching nearby, saw what Sarah had done and immediately followed her example, taking more of Tommy's load. Within minutes, other recruits had done the same, sharing the burden and allowing the platoon to maintain its pace. When they reached the halfway point of the march, drill instructor Morrison called a brief rest. As the recruits caught their breath and hydrated, he walked over to Sarah. "That was good leadership back there," he said quietly. "But you need to understand something. In combat, you might not be able to help everyone. Sometimes Marines have to make hard choices." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "But if I can help someone today, they might be able to help someone else tomorrow. That's how teams work." Morrison studied her face for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "Carry on, recruit." The second day of the Crucible brought the combat simulation exercises, where the platoon had to work together to overcome various tactical challenges. These events were designed to test not just physical skills, but leadership, problem-solving, and the ability to function under extreme stress. During one particularly challenging scenario, the platoon was tasked with crossing a simulated minefield while under simulated enemy fire. They had limited resources and had to figure out how to get all members of their team safely to the other side while carrying their equipment. In a simulated wounded Marine, the platoon's natural leaders, stepped forward to organize the effort, but they quickly became bogged down in arguments about the best approach. Time was running out, and the drill instructors were increasing the pressure by shouting and creating additional obstacles. That's when Sarah spoke up. "Listen to me," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We're overthinking this. Jake, Marcus, you two are the strongest. You take point and mark the safe path. Tommy and David, you help carry the wounded Marine. Everyone else, we follow single file and trust each other." There was something in her voice that commanded attention. Perhaps it was the confidence born from her combat demonstrations, or maybe it was the respect she had earned by helping her teammates during the march. Whatever it was, the platoon immediately stopped arguing and followed her plan. They completed the challenge successfully, and more importantly, they completed it as a unified team. During the final night of the Crucible, as the recruits huddled together around small fires trying to stay warm on minimal rations, conversations turned to what they had learned about themselves and each other. "I need to apologize to you," Jake Thompson said to Sarah. "When you first got here, I thought you were just some girl trying to prove a point. I was wrong. You've shown more heart and leadership than most of us combined." Sarah stirred the small fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise into the dark sky. "We all had things to prove when we got here," she replied. "The difference is I had to prove them to survive." Marcus Rodriguez nodded from across the fire. "You know what I learned? Size doesn't make you a Marine. Heart does. And you've got more heart than anyone I know." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of boots approaching. Drill instructor Morrison emerged from the darkness, his silhouette imposing against the firelight. "Gather around, recruits," he said, his voice carrying a different tone than they had heard before. "Tomorrow morning you will participate in the Warriors' Breakfast. After that, you will no longer be recruits. You will be Marines." He paused, looking at each face around the fire. "But before that happens, I want to tell you something. In my 8 years as a drill instructor, I have seen a lot of platoons come and go. Some are strong individually but weak as a team. Others are good teams but lack individual excellence." His eyes found Sarah in the firelight. This platoon is different. You have learned that true strength comes not from overpowering others but from lifting them up. You have learned that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about being the voice that brings everyone together when it matters most. Morrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was an eagle globe and anchor pin, the symbol of the Marine Corps. "This belongs to every Marine who has ever earned the right to wear it," he said, holding it up so everyone could see. "But tonight I'm giving it to the recruit who has best embodied the values we've been trying to teach you." He walked around the fire and stopped in front of Sarah. "Martinez, you came here with something to prove. You proved it on the first day with your fighting skills. But what you've proven since then is far more important. You've proven that Marines take care of Marines, that leadership means service, and that strength comes from within." He pinned the eagle, globe, and anchor to Sarah's uniform shirt. "This doesn't make you a Marine yet," he said, "but it means you understand what it takes to become one." The other recruits began to clap, slowly at first, then building to a genuine demonstration of respect and camaraderie. Sarah felt tears in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Marines don't cry, especially not in front of their platoon. As the night wore on and the fires burned down to embers, the recruits settled in for their final few hours of sleep before the warriors' breakfast. Sarah lay on the hard ground looking up at the stars, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about Carlos and his training, about her parents working multiple jobs to support their family, about the doubters in her hometown who said she would never make it. She thought about the yellow footprints, the combat demonstrations, and the long marches through the South Carolina darkness. Most of all, she thought about the men sleeping around her, who had started as strangers and critics but had become something more important, her brothers in arms. The next morning, the warriors' breakfast was a celebration unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The drill instructors who had been their tormentors for 13 weeks suddenly became their biggest supporters, congratulating them on their achievement and welcoming them into the Brotherhood of Marines. During the ceremony, each new Marine received their eagle, globe, and anchor pin officially, along with the right to be called Marine for the rest of their lives. When Sarah's name was called, the applause from her platoon was thunderous. Later, during the graduation ceremony, families gathered to watch their sons and daughters become Marines. Sarah's parents had driven from Texas to be there, and when she saw them in the crowd, she felt a surge of pride that threatened to overwhelm her composure. After the ceremony, as families and new Marines celebrated together, drill instructor Morrison approached Sarah one final time. "So, what's next for you, Marine?" he asked. Sarah straightened to attention. "I'm going to infantry school, sir. Then hopefully deployment with a combat unit." Morrison smiled. "I thought so. You know, when I first saw you standing on those yellow footprints, I thought you were going to be my biggest problem. Instead, you turned out to be one of my greatest success stories." 3 months after graduation from Paris Island, Marine Martinez found herself at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, preparing for her first deployment with the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. The transition from boot camp to the fleet had been challenging in ways she hadn't anticipated. Infantry school had been intense, but manageable. Sarah's combat skills and physical conditioning had served her well, and she had graduated near the top of her class. But joining an established unit with Marines who had already deployed together presented new challenges that no amount of training could have fully prepared her for. Her squad leader, Sergeant First Class Williams, was a veteran of 3 combat deployments who had initial reservations about having a female Marine in his infantry unit, but he was also a professional who judged Marines by their performance, not their gender. "Martinez," he said during her first week with the unit, "I don't care if you're a man, woman, or Martian. What I care about is whether you can do your job when lives are on the line. Everything else is just noise." Sarah's reputation from Paris Island had preceded her, and some of the Marines in her new unit were curious to see if the stories were true. During a unit combat training exercise, she got her chance to prove herself once again. The scenario involved a simulated patrol through hostile territory, with the unit having to respond to various threats and challenges along the way. Sarah was assigned as the point person for her fire team, responsible for detecting and neutralizing potential threats. About halfway through the exercise, the unit was ambushed by role-playing opposing forces. In the chaos that followed, one of the newer Marines, Private Johnson, became separated from the group and was declared wounded by the exercise controllers. The unit had to decide whether to risk additional personnel to recover Johnson or to continue with their mission. It was exactly the kind of difficult decision that Marines face in real combat situations. Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll get him," she told Sergeant Williams over the radio. "Negative, Martinez," Williams responded. "Too dangerous. We need to continue with the mission." But Sarah had already moved. Using the stealth and movement techniques she had perfected during her years of martial arts training, she worked her way through the simulated hostile territory toward Johnson's position. The exercise controllers, who were acting as enemy forces, were impressed by her ability to move undetected through terrain they thought they had covered completely. When she reached Johnson's position, she found him injured and unable to move on his own. Instead of trying to carry him out, which would have been nearly impossible given their size difference, Sarah used her knowledge of combat, medicine, and improvised engineering to create a drag system that allowed her to pull him to safety while maintaining a low profile. The exercise controllers later called it one of the most innovative rescue techniques they had seen during training. More importantly, her fellow Marines saw that she was willing to risk her own safety for a teammate, which earned their respect in a way that no amount of combat demonstrations could have achieved. After the exercise, Sergeant Williams approached her privately. "That was good work out there, Martinez, but you took a hell of a risk. In a real combat situation, that decision could have gotten you both killed." "Yes, Sergeant," Sarah replied, "but it also could have saved a Marine's life. Sometimes that's a risk worth taking." Williams studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're right. Just make sure you're calculating those risks correctly. Dead heroes don't do anyone any good." 2 weeks later, the battalion received orders for deployment to Afghanistan. For Sarah, it would be her first taste of real combat, the ultimate test of everything she had learned and trained for. The deployment began quietly, with the unit taking over security operations in a relatively stable area of the country. But Sarah quickly learned that stable was a relative term in Afghanistan, and that danger could appear without warning in ways that no training scenario could fully replicate. Her first real test came during a routine patrol through a local village. The unit was conducting what the military calls presence operations, showing the local population that coalition forces were actively working to maintain security in the area. Sarah was walking, point for her fire team, when she noticed something that didn't look right. A pile of debris by the side of the road looked too organized, too deliberately placed to be random trash. "Sergeant Williams," she said into her radio, "I think we have a problem up here." Williams moved up to her position and looked where she was pointing. "What do you see, Martinez?" "That pile of debris," Sarah said. "It wasn't there yesterday when we came through this area. And look at how it's positioned. If someone wanted to hide an IED, that's exactly where they would put it." Williams called for the explosive ordnance disposal team, and after a careful investigation, they discovered that Sarah's instincts had been correct. Hidden beneath the debris was an improvised explosive device, powerful enough to destroy an entire vehicle and kill everyone inside. "Good catch, Martinez," Williams said after the device had been safely removed. "Your attention to detail just saved lives." Word of Sarah's detection of the IED spread through the battalion, adding to her growing reputation as a Marine who could be relied upon when things got serious. But her biggest test was still ahead. 3 months into the deployment, Sarah's unit was tasked with providing security for a humanitarian convoy delivering medical supplies to a remote village. Intelligence reports suggested the area was secure, but in Afghanistan, situations could change rapidly. The convoy was halfway to its destination when it was attacked by a well-coordinated group of insurgents using small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades. The lead vehicle was disabled, and the convoy was trapped on a narrow mountain road with limited options for movement. In the firefight that followed, Sergeant Williams was seriously wounded when shrapnel from an RPG explosion tore through his left shoulder and arm. With the squad leader down, command fell to the next senior Marine, but he was pinned down by enemy fire and unable to coordinate the unit's response. That's when Sarah made the decision that would define her entire military career. Without waiting for orders, she used her small size and stealth training to work her way around the enemy position. Using terrain features and natural cover, she managed to get within striking distance of the insurgent fighters who were pinning down her unit. What happened next was over in less than 60 seconds, but it would be talked about for years afterward. Sarah used her martial arts training and combat experience to systematically eliminate the enemy threat. Moving like a shadow through the rocky terrain, she neutralized 4 insurgent fighters using a combination of her rifle, hand-to-hand combat skills, and tactical expertise that left her fellow Marines amazed. With the immediate threat removed, she was able to coordinate the evacuation of Sergeant Williams and the successful completion of the humanitarian mission. Later, as Williams was being loaded into a medical helicopter, he grabbed Sarah's arm with his good hand. "Martinez," he said, his voice weak but clear. "That was the finest piece of soldiering I've ever seen. You saved this entire unit today." The after-action report filed by the company commander described Sarah's actions as exceptional valor in the face of enemy fire and recommended her for the Silver Star, one of the military's highest decorations for combat heroism. But for Sarah, the real reward was simpler. As she sat in the mess tent that evening, surrounded by the Marines whose lives she had helped save, she realized that she had finally found her place in the world. The small girl from Texas who had been told she couldn't handle Marine training had not only survived but had thrived in ways that no one, including herself, could have imagined. She thought about Carlos and his training, about her parents' sacrifices, about the yellow footprints at Paris Island, and about all the people who had doubted her along the way. They had been wrong about what she couldn't do. But more importantly, she had been right about what she could become. Marine Sarah Martinez had proven that courage comes in all sizes, that strength is measured not in pounds but in determination, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who change everything. The doubters had said she couldn't handle training. Instead, she had handled everything the Marine Corps could throw at her, and had emerged stronger for it. She had flattened 5 Marines in her first week of training, but more importantly, she had lifted up countless others in the years that followed. That was her real victory, and it was one that would last a lifetime.